Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry Live. Tonight, we are going to be talking about communication and how you communicate all of the awesome things that you are doing in your classroom to all of the other stakeholders that might have an interest in knowing what's happening in your classroom. And that can include people like your students so that they know what it is that they are working on. It can be the students' parents, as well as other colleagues, and as well as administrators also might want to have an idea of what is going on in your classroom. Especially if you are going to be trying something like inquiry-based learning or spiraling or something that is a little bit different and 21st century, we have to remember that a lot of people who are not in education right now were educated in a system that looks totally different from classrooms today. So sometimes being able to communicate the things that are happening in your classroom is a really important and vital step so that people don't get the wrong idea, because sometimes we can't always rely on, say, our students to be the best communicators about what exactly is happening and why you're doing certain things the way you're doing. So that's what we're going to talk about. I know that for so many of you are getting ready to go back to school. I myself started today. I went back into my classroom. I am a 4-5 teacher in Ontario, and I am getting ready to go into year number, I think it's 11 in teaching. So it's the same thing every year, getting back into it and planning out how you are going to communicate what it is that you're doing in your classroom with others is important. So if you're new to the show today, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Patty, and like I said, I am a teacher here in Ontario for a 4-5 class, and I'm also the teacher blogger behind madlylearning.com. So let's jump right in and get started. So when you're thinking about communication in your classroom, you really have to think about 3 different stakeholders that you should maybe consider communicating what is happening in your classroom. The first primary focus is going to be your students. At any point in time, my litmus test as to whether or not my students understand what's happening in my classroom is if anybody walked into my classroom at any point in time, picked a random student and said, "What are you doing and why are you doing it?" I want my students to be able to answer those 2 questions. They have to be given the keys to the learning kingdom. You have to be really explicit with your students as to what it is that you're doing in the classroom and also why you're doing certain things the way you're doing them. So if you are having them do something in math, if you're having them solve a problem, you want to make sure that they're aware that the reason they're solving that problem is because they need to work on problem solving skills, perhaps justifying their thinking or showing their work. There has to be a goal. So the very first thing that I do to make sure that my students are aware of what's happening in my classroom is I use a focus board. So one of my bulletin boards, it's actually a blackboard in my room, I convert that into a focus board. So there's 2 components for me with that focus board. The first one is I go through all of the subjects that I cover with my students that they are going to go through each day where there will need to be in that classroom. So I'm not including things like library or including phys ed, anything that's in the classroom. I make sure there's a header on the focus board for that subject. And underneath that header, I'm going to write what it is we're working on. So they're going to be able to use that focus board as an anchor for if someone were to ask them, "What are you doing?" We are in science learning about rocks and minerals, because that will be on our focus board. And "Why are you doing it?" would be the learning goals and the big ideas that would be on my subject-specific science board in the classroom. So there will be 2 different locations for my students to look for that information. But I like having that focus board front and center so that students know what we're working on at all times. It's also really handy because it's easy to just quickly take a snapshot or a picture of that and send it out to parents. And other teachers can come in and see what you're working on, as well as your administrator at any point in time can come in and see what it is that you are working on. So I really find having a focus board is handy because it allows students to know all of the subjects that we're focusing on during that time. I also, right beside those subject specific, I like to put an agenda. So I include the agenda for the week as well as the subject focus on the same area. And I like to have the agenda because that's where students can then record in their own agendas what it is we're working on. It's also another quick snapshot for me to be able to share that out with parents. So I write it once and I can use it in multiple ways, which I also really enjoy. And it lets me put all of the different things that might be happening that students need to remember that might not be so curriculum based. So the focus board for the subject specific tasks are going to be very curriculum focused versus the agenda board, which is going to be more of when do we have assemblies? When is a spirit day? Do we have a basketball practice this week? Bring in pizza money, lunch lady, all of those things are going to be on the agenda board. So it's kind of the home base for students as to what they need to be focusing on that week. So I find that's a really key way to focus my students on that board to begin with. Now, I also said that I have the answer to the why we're doing it is going to be up on the subject specific boards. So I try to have one area in my room where students can go to or look to see what it is that we're going to be learning for that subject. So I have a math board, a board that is dedicated just to our learning goals and success criteria for math. And I try to put the evidence of learning. So starting on Tuesday when I go back to work, those boards are not going to have anything on them because we've not done anything yet. So I definitely like to build what it is that we're working on as we're working on it. So I'll post up learning goals and success criteria up there for students so that it's kind of their look for. So what is it that if you're working through fractions, what are the look fors for assessment purposes that I'm looking for? That goes up on the subject specific boards. And I also will have all my anchor charts and different activities. We'll post those up there as evidence of student learning as we're going. And those get updated. I would love for them to be updated more often, but we update them as time allows. So sometimes they're not as updated as, say, my focus board is because, well, life happens, and that's just the reality of being a teacher. Switching a little bit, another way that I keep organized with my students is using Google Classroom. So if we're teaching 21st century students, we're probably using a form of technology. And if you're using technology, you might be using Google Apps, including Drive, Slides, and Docs. And if you are, you probably had that time where somehow the student has completed it and you need a way for students to share that work with you. And your default is, well, just share it with me. So they'll just click the share button at the top of Google Docs and share that file with you. Or sometimes you will get them to email it to you as an attachment. Well, if you've got 30 students in your classroom all sharing documents to you, it all goes into one hole inside your Drive account. And it's not organized, it's difficult to find, and you're often going to lose or be very easily overwhelmed with all of the work that students might be handing in. And then it's difficult to mark and track and hand back to students, and then just keeping track of all of that is a bit of a nightmare. So if you are going to use Google Docs for education, then you have to pair that, in my opinion, with Google Classroom. So the reason I really like Google Classroom is it's like a to-do list for each of my subjects where we have digital assignments. So even if it's just a matter of me sharing links or having them fill out little quizzes for formative assessment, in my Google Classroom, I think of it as little to-do lists for each subject, and I will put an item, an action item that students need to complete. So in those separate classrooms, and I organize them one per subject, generally speaking. I'll have one for language, one for math, one for grade 4 science, another for grade 5 science, because they are 2 separate tasks. And that's how I would structure the Google Classroom. Now, the one thing that I really like, and the reason I've bought into using Google Classroom, is it automatically organizes my drive. So when a student sends and hands in a document, it automatically gets organized into a folder in my drive. And within that folder, there's new folders, and it's a new folder for every single task. So if I assign a Google form for formative assessment for a math assignment, then in my drive, automatically, I will have a folder for the math classroom. Inside that folder will be the formative assessment task. And inside that folder will be all of my students' assignments. And it's easy for me to find, and I can look at them subject by subject. I can also view them through Google Classroom themselves, so I never actually have to go into my drive to find student work if I need to. And that's the best part. I was finding my email was getting bombarded with student assignments, or my Google Drive was just a chaotic mess, and Google Classroom by far has helped me to keep that organized so that I can more effectively have a learning management tool that organizes student work digitally, because I don't have it in my hand. So I can't just lay it out on my desk and sort it that way. I have to have a way to organize it digitally, and for me, Google Classroom really helps. Now with Google Classroom, there is an ability to, if your school has turned on, so it is a feature that they can either turn on or turn off. If your school does have the feature, Google Classroom will allow parents to be connected to their child's Google Classroom account so that the parents will also be notified of just their students' work. So they can see when there's assignments that are incomplete, and they can see when there's assignments that have been marked and handed back to students, so they can stay on top of those. Some parents would never do that, but those parents that really want to stay on top of those things, it's really easy for them to be able to do. So that's one of the things I really like about Google Classroom. The other way, we'll transition from how I'm communicating with students, and we'll move more into how I'm communicating what's happening in my classroom to parents. So parents are sending their kids to us for 5-6 hours a day, and their kids come home, and if they're like mine, you ask them, what'd you do today? Nothing. And they get no information, and they want to know if their child is doing okay. And they want to know that their child is learning something, but they're probably not getting a whole lot of information from their child, or they might be getting information like when you're doing, say, a pulleys and gears unit, and they say, oh yeah, we played with Lego all day, which is probably true. They did play with Lego, but they were also constructing some pretty complex science structures as well. So what's a parent to think? However, if you can use a form of communication with parents that lets them know what's happening in your classroom before it happens, they have a conversation starter to speak to their student, their child with, or it gives them a framework to understand what it is their child did at school. So if you have already informed the parents that this week you're going to be using Lego to be building pulleys and gears, or structures that use pulleys and gears, and students will be researching that, when their child does come home and say they played with Lego all day, the parent then has a context or a framework in which to understand what that comment means. And it's not just free time and playtime. There's really some real learning going on. Now, there's a variety of ways that you can communicate with parents. So I've heard of teachers using Remind. I have not used that personally, and I'll tell you why in a couple of minutes. But I've heard teachers use Remind. I've seen teachers using Twitter and Seesaw, all apps that I've heard just positive things, and you use them all the same way. You reach out to parents and you're communicating with parents as to what's happening in your classroom. And then there's always the traditional form of sending home newsletters with students weekly or monthly, letting parents know what's going to be happening. Those are all the traditional methods. I myself use a classroom website. And I sometimes hear a lot of teachers say, oh, it's so much upkeep for a classroom website. And yes, there's a little bit of truth in that, but I'll tell you why I really like having a classroom website, because it's so robust and allows me to be able to do a lot of things, which if I think of all of the ways different teachers are being pulled to communicate with parents, I can use my website as the home base, and it can communicate automatically with parents in a variety of ways so that content on my website can be consumed by parents in a variety of ways. So it all comes down to a website. It has the ability to use what's called an RSS feed. And I'm not even really sure syndication is in there, one of the S's, but I'm not really sure what an RSS feed stands for, other than essentially what it is it's like a subscription to everything you post on your website. So when you update your website, if somebody has subscribed to that website's RSS feed, then it can do things with it. So there are readers that you can get on your phone. There are readers that you can have on your computer. You can have an email service subscribe to that RSS feed for your blog, and then it emails parents every time something is updated. Twitter can also read an RSS feed, and you can use programs such as If This Then That, or IFTTT, to also read your ISS or RSS feed and send it out to other services. So it's really versatile, and it's actually pretty easy to set up, because every blog, when you write it, automatically will have an RSS feed, I think. I'm pretty sure. Every blog I've ever had the ability to have an RSS feed. Blogger and WordPress are the two websites that I have most familiar with, and both of them have the ability to share blog posts through this RSS feed. So when I update my website, and I can update it through an app, I have WordPress for my classroom website. That is the format that my school board has used for their websites for school. I know that there's also Google Sites as well as Blogger. I know both Blogger and WordPress also have apps where you can update your website, add pictures, add text, add links, all through the app on your phone. In fact, most of my blog posts that you read have generally been written on this phone at 9 o'clock in my son's room with the lights out. So I will often update a lot of my blog posts on there. So if you're wanting to have a quick way to update your parents, you can update a website, and you can do that all through your phone. So you're not necessarily needing to log in to the website on the computer and set it up really technically. Now, if you want to have parents with the ability to receive an email from your website, you can use two tools one is MailerLite and the other one is MailChimp. Both of them are free. MailChimp is often the first one people try when they're doing that. So how I've set that up is I've logged in and set up an account with MailChimp, and I have followed through. They have a walkthrough tutorial about setting up an email, and you set it up to subscribe to the RSS feed for your blog. And then at the end, it gives you a little bit of code that you don't have to know code. You just simply copy and paste. So if you can copy and paste, you can take that code and you can throw that code into one of the HTML sidebar in your website. And I know that's probably sounding really technical. And if you need, I can probably take a screenshot of what that looks like the next time I do it myself. But you can take that code and it walks you through what this looks like, and you put that into your website, and it gives a little sign up form. And when a parent goes onto your website and they enter their email into that area, then they will automatically get updates then from your blog. Every time you update it, they will get that automatically sent to their email. The other way you can do it is you can just manually enter their email. So you ask if they want updates by email, they say yes, and then you can manually add their emails. And once it's set up, it's hands off. You don't have to go in and email, trigger it to go every single time. You update your website, you say post, it automatically goes to your parents' email inbox. The other way you can set up an RSS feed is to automatically, every time you post on your website, it can also go to Twitter. So instead of having to be a teacher who tweets, has a website, and emails parents, you can just post to your website, and you can get services to automatically send it to those other two sites, which is something that I am a big fan of, is doing something once and then leveraging some of the tools and tricks that are out there to be able to send it out into multiple ways so that people can consume what you're putting on your classroom website. They can consume that both on say Twitter or through email or right on your website. And it sits there so people can scroll through previous weeks and kind of go back and see things. I also like the fact that on a website, I can host different resources. So if I have I can put links for parents, I can put pages that I want them to download. So if it's a homework page, or if it is a response or something that I want parents to have access to so that they can print off at home, then I can host that or put that up on my website, and then they can get the link to that sent to them in their email, but they can download it and it's right there. The last thing I do is I set up for communication, because sometimes you don't just want to communicate digitally, but you also want to communicate in person. And having meetings with parents is an important part of our job. But one of the ways that I have found to save me a little bit of time is to set up what I have called office hours. So if you think of college and university professors will have office hours. So I have preset times in my week that remain open for parents to sign up to meet with me in person or to have a parent-teacher meeting with me. And most of those sessions stay empty, but I like to have parents know when I'm available. So that way there's not a lot of this back and forth of, well, I'd like to meet you. When can I meet you? Parents can log straight onto the website and I can post a link there for them where they can see the days I'm available, and then they can just email. So I can set that up actually in Google Calendar as appointments, recurring appointments, and they can simply just get a link to that recurring calendar and they can see when I have meeting times available, and they just click that link and it's booked. So I get an email letting me know that they have booked that time slot, and then I will then confirm with them and just say, I got your confirmation that you wanted to meet with me. I'm happy to meet with you at that time. So parents know that I'm available, and they also know when I'm available, so they can then book those times. So I do save a little bit of that back and forth trying to figure out times that are going to work. And I mean, it doesn't work for all parents, but at least for some parents, it gives them those opportunities to say, here's a good time for me to meet. So then I can communicate on a more personal one-to-one level. So those are the things that I use to communicate what's happening in my classroom with others other than me. So trying not to keep all of that information in my head. So I do things like having a focus board and an agenda board, using Google Classroom with my students so that they can keep track of their assignments. With parents, I have a classroom website, and I use the power of a website to be able to push the information on that website to multiple platforms so that people can consume that content. And I can show you how to do that the next time I do that myself, I'll do a screen share and I'll post that in my insiders group so that you can see how I go through that process to post and share that content with my community. So I hope that gives you some ideas about the different ways that you can communicate with others about what is happening in your classroom, especially because we're working in 21st century classrooms, and education and classrooms look a lot different today than they do 20 years ago. So I think it's really important that we're communicating with others all of the awesome things that might be happening in our room, so they have context to understand the stories that they might be told about what's happening in our room. So that's what I have for you tonight. Thank you very much. There will not be a live show next Monday as everyone's getting ready for school. It is a holiday, but I will be back the following week after the first full week of school. And if you are a Ignited Literacy Club pop-up group club member, you will see me live in your private Facebook group every day for the first 15 days, helping and coaching you through implementing that Ignited Literacy. If you have purchased it, you can request membership following the instructions in your download. And if you have not, you have until Friday to get in on that special bonus deal where you will receive 15 days of coaching from me in that private pop-up Facebook group, where you can get tips and tricks every day that will help you implement Ignited Literacy in your classroom. So thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you not next week, but the following week. And I hope that everyone has a very good first week back if they haven't already been back in their classroom yet. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye for now.